Hello, time for another Man in Gray book review. This is the second in a series of books I'm reviewing with a Halloween theme for the Halloween holiday coming up. This is also the week of the Nobel Prizes being awarded, and so this book kind of covers both areas. It's a science book, but it also covers kind of a Halloween theme. The book is Making the Monster, the Science Behind Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This book was published in 2018 by Bloomsbury, and it's written by Kathryn Harkup, who does a whole series of these kind of science-related literary books. It's 304 pages. This book came out, as I said, in 2018. That was the 200th anniversary of the first publication of Frankenstein, and so there were a whole lot of Frankenstein-related books that came out that year. And I wrote a review for this book when it came out in 2018, and I'm going to read a shortened, kind of modified version of the review that I wrote at the time. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to read to you what I thought about this book. It's a curious hybrid, being part biography, part popular science, and part literary analysis. Harkup sees Frankenstein as being as much a reflection of the emerging scientific revolution as it is of her romantic ideology. The bulk of the book examines the scientific discoveries made at the time and their possible influence on the writing of the novel. The first quarter of the book is a recounting of Mary Shelley's eventful life up into the publication of Frankenstein. It's a biography that sounds like a Victorian novel. Mary Shelley's mother dies in childbirth. She's raised by her eccentric, politically radical father. As a young teenager, Mary meets and falls in love with the married poet Percy Shelley. They run off with Mary's stepsister, Claire Claremont, to Italy. Both families disown the couple. Mary gets pregnant but loses the baby a few days after the birth. The trio meets up with Lord Byron, and Claire promptly becomes his mistress. Percy's wife then commits suicide, and he and Mary secretly wed. The key event in the writing of Frankenstein occurred during an unseasonably cold and wet afternoon in the summer of 1816. The Shelleys were visiting Lord Byron and his friend Dr. John Polidori at a villa near Lake Geneva when Byron suggested that they have a competition to see who could write the best ghost story. According to an account Mary wrote years later, a few days after Byron's challenge, she awoke from a nightmare during an electrical storm with the germ of the plot. Some modern scholars dispute this account. Mary kept a journal during this period, but the volume dealing with the months in which she began the novel is missing. Whether it was lost over time or deliberately destroyed is unknown. Percy Shelley and Lord Byron both began stories, but quickly tired of the Gothic genre and abandoned them. Later, Polidori reworked Byron's fragment into his own story, The Vampire, which is considered to be the first vampire story, years before Dracula. In this biographical section, Harkup speculates on how conversations Mary had with her husband, Byron, and Polidori on the nature of life may have planted the seeds of the novel in her mind. It does remain a mystery how an 18-year-old with limited writing experience could craft an iconic and revolutionary novel on her first attempt. At the time of publication, there were a number of Percy Shelley's friends who suspected he ghost wrote the book for his wife, but he always insisted that Mary was responsible for the entire work. However, Harkup makes clear that as the book was being prepared for publication, Mary gave her husband carte blanche to edit the novel as he saw fit. We do not know what changes he made, if any. After relating the origin story of Frankenstein, the author spends the bulk of the book portraying the state of science during the time Frankenstein was written. The early 19th century was a transitional time in science. Many important discoveries were being made, but there was no overall framework to put them into context. For example, the English chemist Humphrey Davy, a personal friend of Mary's father, used the electrolysis process to discover several new elements, including sodium and potassium. But there was as yet no periodic table to fit the elements into and make predictions about other undiscovered elements. There were attempts to transplant organs into animals and humans and to transfuse blood, but knowledge of the immune system was largely non-existent, and it would not be until the 20th century that tissue rejection was understood. British ships were bringing back exotic flora and fauna from throughout the empire, but Charles Darwin's natural selection theory was still decades away. One of the most debated topics among scientists of the day was on the nature of life. Many believe that life was created by an invisible fluid that drained away when a body perished. When the Italian scientists Alessandro Volta and Luigi Galvani began experiments with batteries, some thought that electricity just might be that fluid. This led to some gruesome experiments on the bodies of executed prisoners. In particular, the author details an experiment by Dr. Andrew Urey done immediately after the hanging of a convicted murderer, Matthew Clydesdale. Urey opened Clydesdale's neck and applied electric shocks to the spinal cord. The corpse began kicking and making facial gestures, causing some of the observers to flee in terror. Such experiments failed to reanimate the dead, but accounts of them may have given Mary Shelley the idea of using electric shock to bring the monster to life. In the course of these experiments, Dr. Urey came tantalizingly close to inventing the cardiac defibrillator some 150 years before its actual creation. These stories would make the scientific section of Making the Monster enjoyable for those English major types who come to this book mainly for the background on Mary Shelley. Harkup concludes her book with an account of Mary's life after Frankenstein and a look at how the novel affected the culture of the time. Mary gave birth to 3 more children, nearly dying once in the process. 2 of her children died from diseases, and then Percy drowned after foolishly sailing off into an upcoming storm. Her stepsister Claire gave birth to a daughter by Lord Byron. She gave up the child to Byron, who promptly stuck his daughter in a nunnery. Mary and her surviving son returned to England, but her father-in-law refused to see her and only grudgingly sent her small amounts of money to help raise her son. She continued to write literary fiction, potboilers, and journalism to make ends meet. Mary Shelley substantially rewrote Frankenstein in 1831 for the publication of a second edition. It's this revised version that most readers of the novel are familiar with today. Her last years were unpleasant. She had a falling out with her stepsister Claire, who turned out to be the only member of the Shelley-Byron group who lived into old age. Large debts wiped out most of her son's inheritance, and her health began a steady decline. Mary Shelley died of a brain tumor in 1851 at the age of 53. In a final Gothic touch, a year after Mary's death, her son opened up her desk to find the mummified remains of Percy Shelley's heart, which she had brought back from Italy. Making the Monster is recommended for aficionados of Frankenstein and for those interested in the history of science. The book is written in a lively style with non-technical language. It's a welcome addition to those interested in Mary Shelley's classic book. And that's my review of the book. The book is Making the Monster, the science behind Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The author is Kathryn Harkup. This has been another Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching.